to here.
This happened in middle school, and I still haven't told anyone the truth. I had a friend that moved out of state, but when her birthday came around, her parents bought a couple of hotel rooms in town, and a group of us stayed with her in one to celebrate. When it was time for bed, we all couldn't sleep, because we were having such a good time and decided to all sit on one bed. There was 2 per room, and tell ghost stories, true or made up. After about an hour of stories, someone had a bright idea to make a Ouija board. I don't remember exactly how we made one in a hotel room, but we somehow had access to cardboard, paper and glue. When it was done, a few girls decided they were going to go to bed because they were getting too creeped out and didn't want to mess with it. So only 4 of us participated. We sat on the floor in a circle around it, and each placed a finger on the cardboard chip, not sure what it's called, and we asked a few questions. We thought it was funny, but at the same time, no one tried moving the chip because we were curious to see if it would actually work with a makeshift board. Someone had the bright idea to ask, "Is there a demon here?" or something along those lines, and was promptly scolded by some of the girls that were watching from the safety of a bed. Us at the board kind of awkwardly laughed because we were a little creeped out. And then the chip started to move towards yes. We all jumped up and screamed, and the only 2 that didn't start crying was me and the one who asked the question. Everyone who was still up started getting angry with her, and she swore she didn't move the chip, and tears started forming in her eyes. I knew she wasn't lying, and the other 2 were so shaken up that they weren't either. So I lied. I told everyone I moved it, and I realized it was a jerk move and I should have fessed up sooner. I got an earful, but at least everyone calmed down, and we threw the board in the trash. Everyone probably still thinks I was a jerk for scaring them, but I think it's better. No one knows what really happened that night.
I had a teacher who had a very interesting Ouija board story. This teacher joked around and wasn't really ever serious, but was funny as hell and an overall good teacher. But when Ouija boards came up, she got extremely serious and shared a bone-chilling story. She had some friends over one weekend and they got bored and decided to break out the good old household Ouija board. They had asked questions and got weird vibes from some of the answers that they received, but pushed forward. Finally, someone asked when they were going to die, and it went around the circle and everyone got a decent number in their 80s or 70s. But one girl got the age 19. Granted, they were juniors/seniors in high school, so that was only a few years away. A few years go by, and the girl who got 19 as the age of death was killed by a car while walking on a beach, while on spring break. Her friend she was with broke her leg or something. She was 19, just a week away from turning 20. The nature of the death and the fact that she was close to her 20th birthday makes it so scary because she was so close to defying the Ouija board. Never ever doing it. Needless to say, I'm too terrified to get answers like that.
Hello everybody. Just before starting, English is not my primary language. I used Reverso to translate most of my thoughts. I just wanted to share my story because I think we are all here in this subreddit for a reason. I'm truly passionate about paranormal stuff. Everything started 20 years ago for me. So this happened during a summer vacation in Spain. My sister, 2 cousins, both girls, and 2 other cousins, both boys, and I were staying at our grandmother's apartment. We were all pretty young, between 8 and 13 years old. I was the oldest, along with one of my girl cousins. We used to love scaring ourselves with paranormal games. One of our favorite things to do was try and call spirits using a makeshift Ouija board. Except we used a Scrabble board. We'd arrange the Scrabble tiles in a circle, like the alphabet, place a glass in the middle, light some candles, and ask questions. Always after midnight, of course. We were just kids. That night, the atmosphere was different. It was extremely hot. Spain was going through a massive heat wave, and we were on the top floor of a 5-story building. The terrace wrapped all the way around the apartment, and we set up everything out there, under the stairs, with candles. Like usual, my cousin and I had our hands lightly on the glass. Sometimes we'd secretly move it, just a little to scare the others. It was part of the fun. But this time, no one was faking. We started the usual way. Spirit, are you there? If there's a spirit here, make yourself known. And suddenly, the glass moved. Not in the slow, hesitant way it usually did when we were messing around. It moved fast, with purpose. I felt something almost pulling my hand. It was like I wasn't in control of it anymore. I looked at my cousin and immediately knew she wasn't doing it either. The glass quickly slid across the tiles, stopping on 7 letters. Then I yanked my hand away. Everyone else panicked and backed off too. The session ended right there. The letters spelled S-A-U-T-E-Z-D. We sat there in silence. Then someone whispered, "Sauter-tu." In English, that translates to jump off the, as in jump off the balcony. We were on the 5th floor. Needless to say, we never did another session after that. We packed up immediately and didn't say much for the rest of the night. The last few days of that vacation felt heavy. No one slept well. We never saw or heard anything else unusual, but the atmosphere had changed. We were scared, and we all knew that something very strange had happened. To this day, whenever we all meet up, someone brings it up. We still talk about that night. I haven't touched a board. I haven't touched a spirit board or even a Scrabble board since. But I've continued reading about the paranormal because I know in my gut that we experienced something real. It fascinates me, but I don't think I'll ever go near that kind of thing again.
I've gone back and forth with the idea of sharing this for a while. After searching through a lot of places on the internet, this seems like the best place to discuss them. I still have my reservations though. In any case, I am looking for answers. Several years ago I was doing my undergraduate studies at a large university in Pennsylvania. This event happened in 2005. I was dating a girl called Erin at the time who was big into New Age ideas, paganism, magic, and the like. And I did learn some cool stuff from her too. Eventually I met some of her like-minded friends, and in our conversations it came up that one of the rooms in the oldest building on campus caused 2 of them, a guy and a girl who were dating, to experience a lot of psychic distress. Kyle had gotten nosebleeds in the classroom, and Julie often grew disoriented or frightened when she was there. Someone in our group had the bright idea to sneak up there one night, and of course we all went for it. It was me, Kyle, Julie, Erin, and a medium named Audra and her friend Sharon, and another girl called Kesha. Sharon and Kesha, like me, had a lot of supernatural experiences in the past, but didn't consider themselves mediums or sensitive or anything. So one night we bought a novelty Ouija board from Walmart, a glow-in-the-dark one because why not, and started doing our thing. At first the planchette didn't do anything, but then it started twitching and eventually it was whipping around choosing letters that made no sense to any of us. Until afterwards, as Kyle was writing down the letters. Then out of nowhere, Audra started mini convulsions. I don't know how else to describe it. Her eyes rolled up and she started spasming and making these horrific pig noises. Not just snorting or squealing, but belting those noises out like I never thought a human would be able to make. She started crawling her way to the door. The planchette was going crazy, and when Kyle jumped to her to keep her from heading towards the stairs which were directly across the hall, we all kind of snapped out of it. Audra was a small, slim girl, but it took 3 or 4 of us to keep her from leaving the room, and all the while there were still horrible noises coming from her, and we all had this incredible sense of danger and foreboding. There wasn't a terrible smell or anything like you read sometimes, but it was terrifying. Not to be anticlimactic, but after that we packed everything up, went back to my apartment over a crappy pizza shop, and stayed huddled together for quite a while. I swear I threw the Ouija board out, but years later I would find it under my bed at a parent's house when I was packing up to move. Seriously, any thoughts or experiences similar, or general comments would be great.
My name is Gary. When I was 19 years old, I lived in supported accommodation. It was a brand new, very large building which was divided into 15 individual bedsits. Opposite my bedsit lived a guy who I felt was extremely different and interesting. He was what I describe as a spiritual person and had a deep interest in the spirit world. He would do tarot readings and astrological charts. Although I too have always been fascinated by these subjects myself, at the time I would consider myself as a skeptic. He was extremely intelligent and I would often have deep, meaningful conversations with him. He was only 2 years older than me, but very mature for his age, and was very calm, completely the opposite to me at that time. One evening he asked if I would be interested in doing a Ouija board, as I told him I was skeptical and I didn't believe in the spirit world. So we were in his bedsit and started, as everyone does, asking if there was anyone who wanted to communicate with us. Straight away we got an answer. We picked up a spirit claiming to be a younger girl. At first everything felt okay, and I didn't feel uneasy. That rapidly changed. Dave was very experienced with these things, and at first I didn't understand why he was writing every question asked and every response down on paper. The reason why soon became clear. He started concentrating the questions, and soon picked up on indiscrepancies in what the spirit was saying. The spirit claimed to be a girl of 9 years old who had died in a fire. It soon became clear this wasn't the case. The atmosphere changed and I started to feel very uneasy. My palms were sweaty. There was an oppressive feel in the room and also a weird smell. The feelings I had were what you would associate with someone or something innocent at first. But once we knew the spirit had told us untruths, the feelings were totally different. They became powerful, not in the sensation, but you felt like you were in the presence of something powerful, angry, and malevolent. We had tried to end what we had started, but it was as if this spirit would not let us go, and we had a feeling something sinister would happen if the right protocol wasn't applied. We found out that this was in fact a woman. Dave asked, "What is it you want?" And it said, "You." Now, I don't know whether this was a mischievous spirit and enjoying me and Dave feeling terrified, or whether it genuinely wanted to harm or take control of Dave. She said she was killed by fire, and it was Dave's family member who did it. We couldn't understand how or why she was saying this, or whether it was even true or it was just a mischievous spirit, but I can only say it didn't feel like it was a cheeky, mischievous spirit. This felt like something powerful. By this time, not only were we terrified, but you could feel something far greater and more powerful than at first. We were exhausted. It was like she was draining our energy. I have to admit, I was close to feeling desperate and regret at ever saying I would do this. One of our friends, Steve, in the bedsit at the other end of the corridor, came and knocked on the door. Dave started to explain what was going on. He then said for him to go and get the priest from the local church. Poor Steve looked at us like we were mental, but agreed. It seemed like ages before the priest came. He stood in the corridor with the door ajar, and his exact words were, "Boys, you don't know what you've done." I could see clearly he looked very concerned. He started to speak in a foreign language. I can only assume he was praying in Latin. He said he had blessed the room. We were able to finally end what we started, and I was so drained and relieved. I didn't have a proper night's sleep in 3 weeks without having nightmares. I slept with the lights on for weeks. I felt like I was being watched and followed. I'd be in my bedsit, and I would turn around because I felt like something was behind me at times. Dave had said he had similar feelings also. Dave had done some research into his family tree. His name was Dave Hopkins, and he was able to find out Matthew Hopkins was a very distant relative of his. Matthew Hopkins was a famous witch hunter a long time ago, and many women were burnt at the stake for being witches with no evidence whatsoever. When he told me this, I had a shiver go down my spine like I've never experienced before. I'm not sure what to make of this, still to this day. Was it a mischievous spirit? Or did this woman really die at the hands of Matthew Hopkins in some sham witch trial? All I will say is, I will never forget the sense of being small and insignificant in the presence of something much more powerful than me. I haven't done a Ouija board since, and never will.
This was last summer, about a year ago. I was in rehab and decided to make a Ouija board, and me and my 3 roommates all agreed we would try it out. We were all very skeptical, mostly leaning towards the side of disbelief, but still open. It was a full moon that night. We started by all holding hands in a circle around the board and saying that we were open to spirits, willing to talk, and I guess just putting the energy out there. We then took the planchette and moved it around the board in circles a few times. We were in rehab with no access to the internet, so kind of just doing what we felt was right, and weren't sure on proper procedures. When we were all moving our hands, we were heavy on the board, and you could feel it being dragged. I will admit I tried moving it on my own, as well as in the beginning just to mess with my friends, but again the planchette felt like it was being dragged. But then I stopped and began to take it seriously, and when it was actually moving, it's hard to explain, but there was an entirely different energy to it. It glides across the board like butter. The board and planchette, of course, were made of cardboard, so it freaked us all out. Sometimes a couple of us would take our hands off, or we'd tell another girl to move her hand and it would keep going. It spells one of the girls' names, Sally. We asked who's contacting her, and it said, sister. Sally had a little sister that died under her care when they were small. Sally was scared. She asked for its name and it's spelled F-L-O-R. I'm thinking maybe it's trying to say Florida but stopped, but at this point Sally is shaking and in tears. Her sister's name was Flor. None of us knew that. After that, I think we contacted another spirit and said that it was female and had been shot, and maybe another one. It's crazy because the energies feel different, like how it glides across the board. So now we're all total believers. I think maybe the next night or 2 nights after, me and my roommate decided to play. I think we contacted a spirit similar to the last one when all of a sudden the vibe completely changes. It spells out my name. And I'm like, oh no, as my name is very unique. And even though I believe in this now, that's the last thing I wanted to happen, for something to address me directly. Then the planchette starts zooming back and forth between A and Z really fast over and over, basically flying out of our hands. We're kind of scared, and no matter what we ask, it keeps repeating the same letters over and over, and we get spooked and stop playing. The next night we decide to try again. Start like usual, putting forth our intentions, doing circles and asking how many spirits were there with us. My name was spelled out again, and I asked who it was, and it said Father. My friend asked me if my dad was dead, so I said no. We asked it what it wanted, and dude, it was spelling out painful, and then went back to doing the AZ thing. Deciding it wasn't going anywhere, we said goodbye and put it away. We tried one more night, but it was the same spirit messing with us with the same letters over and over. So, didn't do it again. The whole experience was so insane to me. I kept a journal of all of this when it happened. So, I went and looked, and tried to give all the details I could, for you to understand the experience.
Here we go. I'm from South Jersey. One summer, a group of my friends and I got obsessed with ghost hunting. We did all the hits up and down the state. Jersey Devil Ruins, The Devil's Tree, Hookerman, Shades of Death Road, Clinton Road, and a few local legends in the Sweetwater/Padstow area. But nothing prepared us for the Ouija board. The plan was to go to a local cemetery and meet up with one of our roommate's friend. I'm not making any of this up. He went by Death Crow. DC, as I'll refer to him from here on out, was deep into the world of paranormal and clearly made it his entire personality. He had black hair tied up in a ponytail and a long braided mud vein style goatee. He didn't speak much. It was dark out, but I could see him carefully sizing up each and every one of us when we arrived to meet him. We were told ahead of time by our roommate to not ask his real name and to take what we were about to do seriously. As a group of early 20-something ballbusters, this was good advice, and we all actually did a good job of being respectful of whatever he had planned. This cemetery was a hotspot according to DC. First, he split the 6 of us into groups of 2 and had us walk around the cemetery to get warmed up. I've had my share of experiences that I can't explain, and I know energy has a lot to do with it. The more you feed in, the more that comes out. I'd say tonight's group was made up of 70% believers and 30% skeptics. Wasn't the usual ghost hunting crew. After about 20 minutes of walking around, we all met back up at the mausoleum steps. This is when DC brought out the Ouija board. He took it out of his trunk and held it up to the headlights of his car so it could charge. That's right, it glowed in the dark. Now none of us had any idea what was planned, and I had never used one before. But I just remember thinking, a glow-in-the-dark Ouija board made by Milton Bradley. Okay. We all sat on the steps and begun. The 6 of us surrounded the board while DC sat up against the huge doors of the mausoleum. I was facing him, my back to the rest of the cemetery, We started asking it questions. Are there spirits here? Give us a sign. Your typical stuff. There was some movement from the planchette, but most of us were suspicious of each other to mess with it. So at this point, who really knows what's what? We asked again for a name, and I remember feeling the planchette jerked in a deliberate way that didn't feel like anything we were doing to it. To this day, I can't remember the name that it spelled. It was definitely Spanish or Latin. Let's hope it wasn't Latin. But it was an odd name none of us could have faked. We asked how it died. It spelled water. We asked if there were other spirits here. It spelled yes. My roommate then had the brilliant idea to ask if bad things were going to happen, and it spelled yes. All of a sudden I felt cold. I thought it was chills, but then I could see my breath. Everyone noticed at the same time how cold it suddenly got. This was the middle of July. As all this was happening, I hear DC go, "Oh," like he knew something we didn't. I looked up, and he was staring straight behind me. That's when the board started to spin. We had all taken our hands off the planchette when the temperature dropped, and now the board was slowly turning all on its own. We froze. It picked up speed, spun around fully 3 times and stopped. I remember checking for fishing line, or some sort of whatever on the bottom. Nothing was tampered with. I suddenly felt heavy, like something was wrapping around me, pushing its full weight down. DC looked right at me and said, "You should go." I wasn't about to stick around for Act 2. I left and took 2 of my other super spooked buddies with me. When our roommate got home, he said they asked the spirit if it favored anyone in the group, and it answered with my initials. They then asked if I was the reason bad things were going to happen, and it said yes. It then spelled move several times. They went from the steps to the hood of the car, to a bench, to a fountain, which is where it said goodbye. My roommate later told me DC said he knew I was going to be the one to draw something out. He told me to leave because he didn't want it to attach to me. Believe what you will about these kinds of things, but I'll never forget the feeling like a weighted blanket was thrown on me out of nowhere. Don't use Ouija boards, kids.
I tried to contact a paranormal entity, and some not so fun things happened. So this is the time my friends and I decided to be extra dumb. And I say this because I want all of those listening to understand that I, as well as my friends, now fully understand how stupid we were being. The important backstory for this location, Proctor Valley. Proctor Valley is in San Diego County and connects the towns of Otay and Jamal. It is protected and is a wildlife area, so there are no houses, no buildings, no businesses. It's situated behind a prominent mountain with hilly ridges boxing in the valley. It is said that this valley is a center for the unexplained. Stories ranging from lights in the sky, ghost cars, ladies in white, random screams, the usual stories that surround almost every isolated dirt road. The place is surrounded with rumors. It is, however, in actuality, a dangerous place. Being situated near the US-Mexico border, it is a pathway frequented for drug smuggling, and being an isolated dirt road on the outskirts of a major city, things tend to go down there. You have your usual terrible stuff, like carjacking, people having their lives ended, as well as lots of bad other things. But a murder in particular stands out. The apparent poisoning of a teenage girl in a blue floral dress that was never identified. found barefoot on the side of the road. Now, time to share my experience. I had driven down the road late at night several times with friends for fun. The place has very few trees, let alone any large ones, but about midway down the road there is a very large tree hanging halfway over the road. This tree has always given me a bad feeling, so I never felt comfortable stopping there to explore. However, this night I was determined. So once and for all, I had to know if this place had something weird going on. I wanted my own experience, and I wanted it badly. I had dug up my family's old Ouija board and studied for weeks on the proper use of it, and how to get the results you want. The whole shebang. We purchased the correct candles, and found the most pure soul we could find, and we drove out to the road. This ended up being a bit of an event, as about 10 people showed up. 4 of us used the Ouija board, 2 filmed, and 4 sat in lawn chairs. Once we all got ready, we began. I, being dumb and unoriginal, thought we should go straight to Demon Land and try to anger a demon and contact it. Which demon? Pazuzu. Again, I was dumb and unoriginal. Well, after we initially started, we heard what sounded like orchestral music being played. Being on a road, we figured it was another car driving down in the distance, but would wait for it to pass and continue, because it would be a bit awkward if someone drove by and a bunch of people were summoning a demon. We waited 25 minutes, but no car showed up. There were no headlights, no noise besides the music, and us being a bit confused and somewhat scared, we carried on. The planchette was moving, but based on the answers, someone had to be moving it. So when a random twig snapped and everyone jumped out of fear, I just stayed with my finger on the planchette. One person, the person moving the planchette, got too scared and opted out, so I and 2 others braved on. I did my best to anger whatever could be out there, and to my surprise we got a response. There was no music being played anymore, and the piece was moving. I asked if anyone was there, and if they wished to communicate. The piece slowly moved to yes in a slow, smooth motion that honestly felt terrifying. It felt like it was being dragged across the board, not like someone was pushing or sliding it. With the confirmation of something wishing to speak, I moved to the next question. Are you Pazuzu? The same feeling. The planchette moved to no. My heart sunk. I was thinking, okay, well I got something biting, let's see what it is. I see everything is fixed on the board, eyes locked, and I asked probably the next logical thing that most people would. Are you a good spirit? Then the 2 phones that were being used to film the event turn off. They then wouldn't turn back on, and the planchette begins to move. It slides to the letter G, and we all let out a big phew. Everyone was relieved it was going to spell good, but then unsurprisingly, it moved to O, more confirmation, but then it stopped. Nothing. No movement at all for over 5 minutes. It was telling us to leave. I asked, do you want us to go? And as I finished the question, my friend drops to her knees. She was screaming and crying. I moved the planchette to goodbye, and I say it and rushed to her and asked her what happened. She said someone was walking over us and pointed down the road. I looked down, and all I saw was a cloud of dust roll off the road 15 feet away. This was the most honest person I'd ever known, and decided right then that we were leaving. She described the person walking towards us as having dark hair, long limbs, but no distinguished facial features. They walked like a video game character, glitching where they stride definitely didn't match pace at all, and their feet didn't seem to touch the ground. When she looked at it, she said she felt every emotion she'd ever felt come over her. She equated it to the feeling of your family dying while you win the lottery on your wedding day. This was almost 2 years ago, and my friend still refuses to go out at night. I tried a year ago, and she cried in the car the whole time, saying she's getting closer. And yes, she's been attending therapy for this. I don't know what she saw that night, but I personally don't want to find out. I have not returned to the road since. I stored away the board, but it went missing 6 days later to the day, along with the candles and books.
My buddy Jeff, using fake names, got a Ouija board from his aunt for his birthday. Weird gift, I know, but he left it unopened in his closet for years, until we were having a discussion about them one day at the soccer field. Our friend Rob happened to be over, and he was a staunch atheist, like a mock you for believing in anything kind of atheist. Jeff was raised Catholic, but never put much stock into it. He was Catholic in name, but not very spiritual. He was very scientifically minded, and ended up actually going to MIT for rocket science. He graduated recently. I was raised Christian, but had largely fallen away from my faith at that stage in my life. Jeff wouldn't discount the possibility of an afterlife, which prompted Rob to ask if we were to mess with the board to prove that it was nothing. We all said sure, and after soccer we drove home, cleaned up, ate dinner and met at Jeff's. Jeff was scientific-minded, as I said. He wanted to see if it would work. He wasn't about to fudge the results by moving the planchette. Rob didn't want it to work. He wanted us to look stupid for his own amusement. I knew for a fact that I didn't move the planchette in any way. So this was a great test. I trusted everyone involved that if that damn thing moved, it wasn't any of us. It moved all right. We contacted a child spirit. Everyone was screaming at one another for moving the piece, but none of us were. Rob eventually asked what the boy missed the most about life. It responded, hugs. Rob didn't want to do it anymore. Jeff didn't want it in his house anymore. I was stunned. Rob went outside and had a long smoke by himself. Jeff and I asked him if he was okay, and he said no. His worldview flipped over. He actually ended up becoming a Buddhist shortly after, a spiritual journey. Jeff didn't appear to be largely affected by it. He remained open-minded and still is to this day. He just has to be careful about which spaces he discusses it in. As for me, I ended up a born-again Christian after my father passed away a few years later. I've had insane interactions with him from the other side, and I'm convinced beyond a shadow of a doubt that our story goes on after death. This story has been in my family for generations and resulted in creation of a strict rule in my family. So decades ago, my mother's maternal grandmother was newly married, really young, and lived in a village where almost every household had cattle. The villagers had a system where one man from each household would take all the village cattle to the forest to graze and bring them back before nightfall. My great-grandmother had a special bond with one of the newborn calves, a buffalo named Ranja. He was really attached to her too, and would follow her around like a puppy and respond to her calls. When he was old enough, he went to the forest for the first time with the herd. But when the cattle returned that evening, Ranji was missing. My great-grandmother panicked, and though her mother-in-law told her to wait for the men of the house to return, she didn't listen. Their village was on a cliff, overlooking a valley, and across the valley was the forest. She went to the cliff's edge and started loudly calling out, "Ranji, come! Ranji, come here!" hoping the echo would reach the forest. After a few calls, she heard a response, Ranji's voice calling back from the forest. But With each reply, his voice got louder, closer, and the pace was unnaturally fast, like it was jumping from the forest to the valley bottom to right near her. Then she looked down and saw something she would never forget. A buffalo-like creature, standing upright like a human in the field below her, with eyes glowing like headlights and breathing like it was furious. It let out a terrifying roar in Ranji's exact voice, and she collapsed in fear. Just then her husband, father-in-law, and some villagers arrived with torches. They saw the same creature before it jumped into the valley and vanished. Everyone was so shaken, they didn't go into the forest that night. The next morning, a search party found Ranji's bloodied body near the grazing grounds. His head was missing. Ever since that night, our family has had a strict rule: never call anyone by name after dark, especially while shouting for them, because something else might hear you and come instead. I used to think this was something from old time and would not happen now, until something eerily similar happened to my grandmother a couple of years ago, during the end of the COVID lockdown. A man from a nearby village passed her house with some sheep and lambs on his way to graze them. My nanny, being a social butterfly, stopped him for a chai. They chatted a bit, and he went on his way. That evening he passed by again while my nanny was busy in the kitchen. He called out from outside, saying that he was going home, and she waved him off from the window. Later that night, around 10 p.m, my nanny heard a lamb crying outside. She stepped out onto the roof and saw my cousin, her grandnephew, on the neighboring roof. They share a common courtyard with the houses right next to each other. He had heard it too. They both thought maybe one of the man's lambs got left behind, and my cousin asked if he should go down to the farms where the cries were coming from and carry him home. My nanny absolutely refused, and instead they started calling out gently for it, like you would to a lost puppy. At first the crying seemed far, like it was from a few farms away, but each time they called, it got closer, unnaturally fast, until the sound was right there in the courtyard. But there was no lamb. Realizing what was happening, my nanny shouted at my cousin to run inside, and she rushed back in too. Nothing else happened that night. A few days later, the same man came by again, and when asked, said none of his animals were missing. When my grandmother told him about what had happened, he got serious and said, "You're experienced. You should know better. Don't call out like that at night." So yeah, in my family, we don't shout anyone's name after dark, even today. What do you guys think it was? My nanny calls it a shalava, which is a shape-shifting demonic entity. Whatever it was comes after inviting, in the form of whatever you were calling for. This incident was told to me by my father. It happened when he and his brothers were young kids growing up in a village in Assam, India. They used to go fishing in a nearby lake almost every day using a net. For a while, they were catching plenty of fish. But slowly their net started coming up completely empty. Day after day, not a single fish. They began to suspect an old man who lived nearby. The man had a habit of waking up unusually early every morning, so my father and his brothers started thinking maybe he was sneaking out before them and stealing their catch. Determined to catch him red-handed, they made a plan: wake up earlier than usual and watch the lake. The next morning, around 3:30 to 4 a.m, they got up and quietly made their way to the lake. It was still dark, but there was enough visibility to see shapes. From a short distance away, they noticed a figure crouching near their net. It looked like someone was tampering with it. They were convinced it was the old man and started yelling, "Hey old man, stop. Why are you stealing our fish?" But then the figure stood up and it kept rising. My father swears it grew to at least 10 feet tall. Whatever it was, it definitely wasn't human. They froze in shock, then pure terror kicked in and they ran all the way home. When they got back, they told everyone what they'd seen. It wasn't the old man. It was something called a gurupak. For context, in Assamese folklore, a gurupak is a water demon. It's described as having the upper body of a human and the lower body of a horse, or sometimes appearing just as a shadowy figure. It's also said to have shape-shifting abilities. There are a couple of other similar beings in the local belief, Bak and Dot, and there's ongoing debate over whether Gurupak and Dot are actually the same entity. But one thing is certain, in all the stories these beings dwell near water bodies, and they're masters of shape-shifting. After that day, my father and his brothers never went back to that lake to fish again. This happened to my mother's aunt a long time ago, in rural India, and was told to me by my mum and grandparents. Back then, girls were married off very young, and my mum's aunt was probably in her early 20s at the time, with a son around 4 or 5 years old. There was a family wedding happening a few villages over, and her mother had cooked lots of delicacies and packed some wedding ritual items that needed to be delivered ahead of time. She asked her eldest daughter, my mum's aunt, to go 2 days early and deliver everything. She agreed, picked up the packed goods from her mother's house on the way, took her son with her, and started walking toward the wedding destination. That time, people traveled by foot through forests and villages, as there were no buses or phones. The walk was around 3 to 3.5 hours, and one had to pass through 2 villages and a forest. While crossing through the forest, near a small brook, she saw a woman standing far away, dressed in full red bridal attire and wearing a lot of gold jewelry. The woman was smiling at her, and my mum's aunt assumed she was from the village ahead, also heading to a wedding, and smiled back politely. The woman suddenly approached quickly and, according to my aunt, looked incredibly beautiful and well dressed. She came near and said, "I am barren. Give me this boy. I'll raise him as my own." My aunt laughed it off and continued walking, but the woman rushed ahead and blocked her path again, this time saying, "Take all my gold. Just give me the child." Getting irritated, my aunt hurled some curses and walked past again. But this time the woman leapt into the air and landed ahead of them, blocking the path for the 3rd time. This is when my aunt realized something was wrong. The woman's breathing grew heavy, and she started growling like an animal. Her skin turned pale and rotten, and her eyes became pitch black. There was no white in them, just black pupils. A horrible smell started coming off her. The scariest part, my mum's aunt's son suddenly began to try to break free from her grip, saying he wanted to go with the woman. He scratched her arms, trying to pull away with all his strength. In her bag, which was tied up in a bedsheet like a backpack, she remembered she had carried a chimta, an iron tongue used to make music at weddings and religious functions. Desperately, she pulled it out and began attacking the entity with it. To her surprise, it burned her. The creature growled and stepped back, but kept blocking the path. Crying and shouting for help, my aunt dragged her son with one hand and kept hitting the entity with the other one until she reached the end of the forest. Just at the edge, near a peepal tree, a tall man dressed in white appeared from behind the tree. He stepped forward calmly, and the entity growled loudly and stepped back. The man shouted at the kid, saying, "Come to your senses, you fool." The kid suddenly stopped trying to escape and started crying. The man then turned to my aunt and said, "Don't worry, she can't cross as long as I'm standing here. You go ahead." She started walking away quickly, but the man called her again and said, "You making me stand here and protect you? You're carrying sweets and still won't offer me any?" She quickly opened her bundle, handed him a few sweets, and he told her to place them on a leaf under the tree, saying he'd eat them later. She reached the village, told everyone what happened, and they helped her get to the wedding safely. But what followed was tragic. Just days later, my mum's aunt lost her mental stability. She began running out of the house, searching for her brother at nights, crying and shouting, hallucinating things that weren't there, and was never the same again. She lived the rest of her life mentally disturbed, and about 5 to 6 years ago, she died. She took her own life by jumping into a body of water. She got old, but never mentally well after that day. No one ever found out who the man in white was. Some believe he was a guardian spirit. Some think he was a saint, but no one really knows. I once asked why the chimta was able to hurt the entity, and was told maybe it was because it was made of iron, or maybe because it had been used often in devotional gatherings and carried some kind of spiritual charge. No one knows for sure, but it saved their lives. The story I'm about to share with you today isn't something that happened to anyone in my own family. Rather, it is an old, widely known tale from Assam, especially well known around the Tezpur region. I came to know of it because it was told to me by elders, and the location where this incident supposedly took place is quite close to my maternal grandmother's house. A long time ago, there was a family with 2 brothers. Every day, the 2 would go fishing together. Like any other day, they set out again one morning, got in their boat, and began fishing using nets in the river. However, something strange began happening. No matter how many fish the elder brother caught and passed to the younger one to keep in the boat, the number of fish kept decreasing mysteriously. Eventually, not a single fish remained. Confused and suspicious, the elder brother asked his younger sibling, "I've been catching so many fish. Why isn't even one left in the boat?" The younger brother responded as if he had no idea what he was talking about, asking, "When did you catch that many fish?" That's when the elder brother started to sense that something wasn't right. As he looked closer at his younger brother, his eyes fell on a strange object near him. A jalunga, a kind of pouch or satchel. Slowly, things began to make sense. The figure sitting before him wasn't his real younger brother at all. Instead, it was a dot, a water demon from Assamese folklore, who had assumed his brother's form. The elder brother realized that this creature must have already killed his real brother and taken his place. Calmly, without alarming the demon, he quietly took the jalunga and hid it. Then he made his way back home with it and placed it inside the large mustard storage container. According to Assamese belief, a dot cannot touch mustard. Unaware of this, the dot, still in the guise of the younger brother, followed him home. The elder brother then told his mother, if he ever asks for the Jalungi, never give it back to him, no matter what. However, he never told her the full truth about what had happened, not even to the newly married wife of his real younger brother. Life went on, the family grew, and both brothers eventually had families and children of their own. But the dot, still living as the younger brother, would often ask the mother, "Ma, where's my Jalungi?" And she would always reply, "It's in the mustard bin, go take it." Time passed. Then one night everyone from the household went out to watch Bahona, Assamese traditional theatrical performance, leaving only the mother at home. That night, the dot came again and asked, "Ma, where's my Jalungi?" This time frustrated from being asked over and over again, the mother lost her patience. She reached into the mustard bin, pulled out the Jalungi, and threw it outside, saying, "There, take your Jalungi." The moment the dot retrieved the Jalungi, it said, "Ma, I'm leaving now," and made a strange sound, tock, 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 3 times with its mouth, then vanished into the night. Later, when the elder brother returned and found out what had happened, he broke down in tears and said, "Ma, your youngest son is gone now, and he'll never return." He finally told the whole truth to the rest of the family. But the story doesn't end there. It is said that even after the dot disappeared, strange things continued to happen. Occasionally, people would find enormous fish left at the doorstep of their house. Gifts, perhaps, for the dot's wife and children. And those children, they grew up looking very different. According to what I've heard, they were much taller than ordinary humans and had unusual facial features. And just so you understand clearly, dot are believed to be powerful water demons in Assamese culture. They have the ability to shapeshift into any form. Their magical strength is stored in a special Jalungi, and if someone manages to steal their pouch while the dot is in human form, it becomes weak and gets trapped in that form. Also, as per Assamese culture, dots cannot touch mustard. This one's about my maternal grandmother, and honestly, it's probably the most intense story I've heard firsthand from my family. There's a lot of backstory, but I feel like it's important to understand the main story. So here we go. My mother was born in a village that, as crazy as it may sound, was literally a dumping ground for dark entities before it became a village. Here in India, especially in older rural areas, exorcisms aren't always about banishing spirits. Most of the time, the priests or tantrics, occultists, just capture the spirit and leave it or bind it in a remote place, hoping it doesn't harm anyone. The area my mother's village sits on was one of those places. A proper deep forest setup, flowing brooks, thick trees, almost no sunlight hitting the forest floor in some spots, and a reputation for being paranormally active for decades. Even today it's considered secluded. You either have to walk 20 to 30 minutes from the main road through narrow trails, or take this inbuilt Kacha road the locals made just a few years ago, full of loose stones and deep turns, impossible for normal cars to cross unless it's a tractor or a sturdy jeep. Now, my grandfather's family, my mum's dad, was one of the first 3 families that decided to settle in that region. They were farmers, and they owned a chunk of unused forest land nearby that was earlier only used for wood collection or to gather grass for cattle. Their old home was falling apart and would have eventually led to property disputes. So the siblings split the land and built new houses there to avoid future issues. Once people saw someone settling, a few more families came too. But soon after moving in, weird things started happening. At first subtle, then really aggressive. Windows shattering at night, hearing laughing and crying in the forests, illnesses after any encounter with no medical cause, cattle dying for no reason, bloodstains outside homes, random dead animal meat dumped near the doorstep, and something or someone knocking at their doors past midnight, asking for food, screaming, crying, pleading. All the families were terrified. They reached out to priests and spiritual people, but most of them backed out as soon as they learned the scale of it. It wasn't one entity, but possibly hundreds. Eventually, one respected priest agreed to help and suggested the best long-term solution: to bring a powerful deity into the area. Since resources were tight, they couldn't build a full temple, so instead, they carved an idol of Lord Hanuman on a giant rock located on my grandfather's land, in the possessed land. That same idol is still there today. The priest and his group came and performed Pran Prathista, a ritual where the energy and consciousness of a god is invoked and placed into the idol, turning it into a living deity. After the ritual was done, things calmed down significantly. The darker forces were suppressed. Some minor stuff still happened occasionally, but that insane level of paranormal activity stopped. Years passed. My grandfather got married to my grandmother. They had kids, and life was peaceful. Until one night, roughly 35 to 40 years ago, my nanny stepped out into the middle of the night to relieve herself. Back then, homes in rural India didn't have indoor toilets. She was doing her business near the edge of the forest when she suddenly heard a laugh, a disturbing, non-human laugh. Then a woman's voice. "Should I come back there? Should I?" "Okay, I'll come." Laughs. "I'm coming." Before the voice could finish, my nanny ran like hell back into the house. She didn't tell anyone about it because my nana, grandfather, wasn't home. He worked far away and only visited once every few months. That night, she slept, scared, alone with her kids. By morning, she had a high fever. Nothing unusual showed up, just this intense fatigue, and she kept getting sicker day by day. My mum, who was the eldest kid, in high school back then, ran around to call the local doctor. More of a local healer than a real doctor. They tried some meds and some home remedies, but nothing worked. By day 2, my mum wrote a letter to my nana, explaining the situation and asking him to return. It took him a week to reach home, and by that time, Nani was very sick and weak. They took her to the hospital, tried different medicines and tests. Nothing worked. Even after trying multiple doctors and spending a lot of money, no one could explain what was happening. Eventually, Nana decided to take Nani with him to the city where he worked, so he could care for her full time. But this created a problem. All the kids were left alone, and someone had to manage the house, the fields, and the cattle. That's when my mum stepped up. She dropped out of school to handle everything. She was maybe 15 or 16, because farming was their only income, and there was no other option. Months passed. Nani's condition only got worse. She stopped eating, lost weight rapidly, and couldn't get up, couldn't talk much. My nana used to write letters but always hid the seriousness of her condition from the kids. But word got around. Villagers who visited them in the city would come back and tell others how bad Nani looked. How it seemed she wouldn't make it. That's when one acquaintance suggested to my nana that this was not a medical issue. It was spiritual. He told him to go see a man who sat outside a very famous Hanuman temple in that city, a well-known occultist. They did, and that man told my grandparents everything. According to my nanny, she hadn't told anyone about that forest encounter, not even my nana, and had completely forgotten it until the priest brought it up, like the memory had been wiped. He told her that the entity she heard that night had tried to reach her but was stopped by Hanuman himself, who had placed himself between her and the demon. He said, "The only reason you're alive is because of him." He then gave Nani a small packet of powder and told her to eat it immediately. Within minutes, she started vomiting, but what came out wasn't normal. It was thick, black, tar-like vomit. She said she felt like 50 kilograms lighter and immediately regained her strength. On the way back home, while waiting for the bus, she told my nana how hungry she was. He took her to a small stall nearby and got her kadi rice. She ate enough for 3 people that day. She recovered almost completely within the week. They came back home soon after, and my mum rejoined college after taking a year's gap. That idol, the one carved on stone, is now enclosed in a proper temple that the villagers later built together through donations. It still stands there, and the people worship there daily. I don't have a picture of it, but it's something I'm going to make sure I clip the next time I visit my nanny. Not going alone into that forest though. My grandmother is still alive and doing well, touch wood. But we lost my nana during the COVID wave. Assalamu alaikum to everyone here. First of all, I belong to a Muslim family and currently studying as a student of Islamic studies. This incident happened when I was 6 to 7 years old, in the same apartment or flat in which I'm currently living in. The story is, when I was a kid, me and my siblings slept with our parents in the same room, and we always turned off our lights while going to bed. In the middle of the night, at around 2 to 3 a.m. while everyone was sleeping, I woke up and felt the urge to go to the bathroom. But here's the thing, for some odd reason, the door of our bathroom was always open, and while I almost entered the bathroom, I saw a black-colored head emerging from the gap under the sink. After the head fully emerged, it turned to my direction and started reaching for me and tried to grab me with its long black hands. I still remember, that thing had horns on its head, blue eyes, and large canine teeth that were around 2 to 3 centimeters long. I was scared and hurried back to my father who was sleeping. I woke him up and told him to turn the lights of the bathroom on so I could go pee. By the time my father turned on the lights, that thing was gone. Now, I'm 28 years old and know about these entities known as Djinn, which can shapeshift and go through any solid objects. We Muslims don't believe in ghosts, but we do believe and know that jinns exist. May Allah protect us all from these types of entities. Here's another story that happened in my current apartment. This happened when I was around 17 to 18 years old. I was in another room folding sheets. No one was at home except for me and my mother. Some of my siblings were gone to work or to tuition. What happened was, I was folding sheets in another room, and my mother went to take a shower. While I was folding the sheets, I heard my mother's voice calling me, saying, "I've been calling you for so long, why aren't you answering me?" I rushed to my mother's room and asked by knocking on the bathroom door. I asked, "Mother, did you call me?" Guess what? She said, "No, I haven't called you." I asked again, but she gave me the same reply. After she came back, I told her what had happened. She told me to ignore it, but told me that something similar happened to her. These are the works of Djinn. They can shapeshift and mimic anyone's voice. Do share your thoughts about this. This is my aunt's story, which happened to her when she was 15, back in the early 2000s. My family are from London, but we are ethnically Bengali. This story starts when my aunt and her family all went for a trip back to our ancestral country of Bangladesh. They visited their father's village, or should I say my grandfather's village. It was in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by endless paddy fields. The village consisted of a few really old houses, dating back to the days of colonial Britain, all built around a big pond. There was a small mosque nearby, and further away from the mosque was a small forest. My aunt and her siblings were told by the village elders not to venture into the forest, where there was an old banyan tree. According to them, that specific banyan tree was supposedly haunted. One evening, my aunt and her siblings, along with some of the village children, went into the forest to play, despite being warned not to go over there. The village children assured that they played in the forest many times and nothing happened to them, as long as they didn't go near that tree. The children showed my aunt and her siblings the infamous tree, and they all agreed to stay away. The tree looked very old and creepy, with its trunk twisted and its branches protruding far and wide. Despite its appearance, my aunt was not so gullible. As being one of the older children in her family, she found all of this talk of haunted trees to be silly, and just a tall tale told by elders of the village to scare the children. However, she agreed to stay away. My aunt wasn't playing, as she felt that she was too old for such childish games, and was only there to supervise the youngsters. The kids started playing it, then afterwards played hide and seek. The village children started begging my aunt to play with them, and to be the seeker. After a while of persuading, she agreed and reluctantly started to count as the kids started to run and look for the best places to hide. Once she was done counting, she went on the hunt to look for them. She managed to find a few of the kids quick enough, mainly the younger ones, but a few were left yet to be found deeper in the forest. My aunt walked further in, and shortly after she happened to stumble upon the banyan tree. She smirked and decided to caress the ancient bark of the tree, going against her promise. She saw that one of the tree's boughs hung low, and thought it would be a nice spot to sit for a while and take in the scenery. After the short respite, she pressed on. When she found all the kids, they all decided to finish the game, as it was dusk and the forest was growing dark. Everyone heard the call to prayer from the mosque nearby, so they all proceeded to walk out of the forest and back home. That night, my aunt awoke mid-sleep due to the heat. In the village, there were no streetlights, so everything was pitch black, and all you could hear were the sounds of crickets and frogs from the pond. She tossed and turned as she tried to go back to sleep, but started hearing a peculiar noise outside her open window. It was a metallic clinking sound. The sound grew persistent, clinking every second. She looked through the grate of the window and saw nothing but the night staring back at her. She decided to call out quietly, hoping for a response, but nothing. Shortly after, The sound stopped, so my aunt brushed it off thinking nothing of it and went back to sleep. A few days later, the family left my grandfather's village and were heading back to the city airport. Their trip had come to an end and it was time to return home, back to the UK. While they were saying farewell to everyone, my aunt saw a woman further behind from everyone else staring at her. My aunt had never seen that woman before during their stay. She thought why no one had introduced her to the woman, as the village was all family orientated. What was very strange was that the woman was dressed in a traditional red bridal saree with a garland around her neck, golden bangles on her wrists, and a headpiece hanging down her forehead. My aunt asked one of her sisters who that bride was, but her sister couldn't give her an answer due to the commotion. When they were at the airport and lining up to be boarded, my aunt's eyes wandered around. Nothing but families all seated and waiting for their respective flights. She then caught a glimpse of a woman in a peculiar red sari. She realized that it was the same woman from the village. The woman was further away from the waiting line, just standing in one place and looking at people walk past her. My aunt found it odd that she was at the same airport as them, despite being seen at the village earlier. Also, what was strange was that the woman was in a bride's attire in the middle of a busy airport, which would be completely unheard of over there. She had no luggage with her, or anyone accompanying her. On board the plane, my aunt was coming back from the bathroom and was surprised to see the woman again, sitting alone and staring out of the window. She told my grandmother that she had seen the woman in the village and asked who she was. My grandmother was too tired to answer and dismissed her question. My aunt concluded that the woman must have been from one of the nearby villages and was passing through theirs as she was also heading towards the airport. She then tried to forget all about it. Back home in London, after a good few days, my aunt and her family all went to visit another one of my uncle's house. It was tradition to visit relatives when returning home, back from a visit to Bangladesh. When they all entered the living room and greeted everyone, my aunt was absolutely shocked to see the same familiar woman in the red sari from the village and the plane. My aunt was very puzzled, but thought that the woman must have been related to the family. This was proof. Everyone was talking and my grandfather was recounting their time in the old country. My aunt was watching the woman and found it weird that she was just standing in the corner listening to the conversation. My aunt also realized that the woman never spoke a single word and couldn't recall anyone ever speaking to her since they entered the house. She wondered why the woman was still dressed up as a bride and found it very bizarre. When it was time to eat, everyone was getting ready to sit down at the table. My aunt was one of the last ones to get up, but realized the woman was staring at her and smiling. She decided to say hello to the woman and asked her who she was in Bengali. The woman didn't respond. She just continued to smile at my aunt. She thought the woman was just shy, as that was quite normal behavior for village women in Bangladesh. She felt a bit awkward and started complimenting on the woman's attire and her pale anklets. "Who are you speaking to?" my uncle said across the room in Bengali. The room was silent and everyone was staring at my aunt in confusion. My aunt pointed at the woman, bewildered at my uncle's question. "What? There's no one there," my aunt's sister responded. My aunt thought everyone was playing a joke on her, but shortly after realized they were all being serious. She started to freak out. She kept saying that there was a woman in the room, but everyone kept insisting that there wasn't anyone there. Everyone started worrying as my aunt was hyperventilating at the sight of the mysterious red figure smiling back at her. She eventually passed out. A while later, my aunt came around and found herself lying on the couch, resting her head on my grandmother's lap, and her sisters all huddled beside her. My aunt didn't see the woman anymore, where she had been previously standing. My aunt darted her eyes around the room to double check if the woman was still there. She wasn't. On the opposite couch there was an imam from the local mosque. He was a family friend and respected community leader, called over by my uncle. The imam asked my aunt what happened, and she explained that she saw the woman first in the village and kept seeing her until that very day, and only she was able to see her, as confirmed by everyone else. After careful consideration, the imam said it sounded like some nefarious entity had followed her from the village and latched itself onto her. My grandfather started to interrogate my aunt about the forest and the old banyan tree, and eventually she admitted to everyone that she sat on the bough of the tree. When my grandfather heard that, he got very angry and scolded her. He repeated that tree was haunted and questioned why she didn't listen to the village elders. My aunt explained that she thought it was all a joke. When the imam asked why my grandfather had thought that the tree was haunted, my grandfather never gave an explanation and said that he would tell him afterwards in private. The imam recited some prayers and blew on my aunt. My aunt couldn't remember most of that encounter as she blacked out again. However, according to everyone present in the room, she started to freak out and started to act manic when she heard the prayers. She started growling, and her eyes looked like they were about to burst from their sockets. She attempted to lunge at the imam, but everyone held her down. A while later, the imam left the house and eventually returned back and gave her special water to drink daily and oil to rub her body with after every time she bathed. This was all part of a long exorcism process known as ruqya in Arabic. That night my aunt was too afraid to sleep, so my grandmother slept in the same bed next to her while one of her sisters slept on the top bunk. My aunt awoke after a long slumber. Her eyes started slowly adjusting to the darkness, but she was still in a sleepy haze. She realized she could hear a clinking sound to her right, towards the window. She thought it was her sister causing a racket, so she groggily told her to be quiet. When the noise didn't relent, my aunt turned and looked towards the window. It wasn't her sister. To her absolute horror, my aunt saw a dark figure sitting on the windowsill. She quickly realized that the metallic sound were the sounds of bangles and anklets being played with. My aunt's eyes fully adjusted to the dark, and it became evident that the figure was indeed that of the woman. My aunt screamed her lungs out, and the whole house awoke. The second visit from the imam explained to my aunt that whatever she was seeing would not go away on its own. She would continue to see it unless she completed her religious treatment, which, he reminded her, was a very long process. My aunt's family was certain that it was a spiritual matter and not a psychological one. My aunt never displayed any signs of mental illness in the past. Days passed and my aunt saw the woman everywhere, though she did get occasional respites from the woman. The woman would show up one day and might follow my aunt wherever she went, but the next couple of days would not be seen at all. She would see the woman at school, standing by the whiteboard in her classroom, looking at the pupils like she was teaching the lesson. The woman would be seen when my aunt was just hanging out with her mates in the park after school, just watching them from the trees. When my aunt would go shopping in the supermarket with her family, the woman was there, waiting for her in the aisles, and always followed them far behind as they shopped. Someday, it would be in the same room as my aunt. Other days, it would be seen through the window on the street. Some nights when my aunt was laying in bed, she would hear the slow clinking sound of the woman's anklets going up the stairs. The sound would stop whenever it reached my aunt's bedroom door, as the figure was waiting to be let in. The woman once was encountered when the family were all sitting at the table to eat, and my aunt found her sitting under the table with her forehead resting on her knees. She screamed, surprisingly, but quickly disregarded the matter in order not to scare her family. The ominous figure never spoke. It never harmed my aunt directly or made any threatening acts towards her. The woman just smiled that eerie smile. My aunt continued her religious treatment, which in turn made her very weak and sapped her spirit. The imam would visit her often, and she would have more exorcism rituals carried out on her, all she could never recount. My aunt tried her best to get on with her life and started to get used to the figure always being around, so much so that she stopped being afraid of it. She even started to talk to it. She used to talk about random things, and the woman just responded with silence. Although she got close to the figure at times, my aunt never dared to touch it. A couple of years passed, and the mysterious woman would appear less frequently, like only a couple of times a month. Eventually, she stopped appearing altogether and was gone for good. My aunt completed her years-long spiritual treatment. She felt a huge relief, but at the same time, in a very bizarre and twisted way, she felt sad and empty. That figure was in her life for so long that she grew so accustomed to it and saw it as normal. For her, not seeing the woman anymore was a huge change in reality. The whole ordeal did take a huge mental toll on her throughout the couple of years, and my aunt was never truly the same after that. One afternoon, my grandfather decided to shed some light into the past as he felt like it was the right time for my aunt to learn the truth. He showed her a very old black and white photograph dating back to the 50s. It was him and his parents and siblings, all in a family portrait. My aunt's eyes widened and her jaw dropped as she saw an old familiar face in the center of the photo. It was her, the woman in the bridal soiree. Garland, bangles, everything. She was next to a man dressed as a groom. My grandfather explained to her that long ago he had a sister. That photo was from her wedding day. The story was that she was married to a man from the neighboring village, but did not want to get married to him. My grandfather's sister was at first promised to another suitor, since they were children. A good, kind man from another nearby village. She grew up with the idea that she would marry that man when she came of age. However, the man she actually ended up marrying offered a larger dowry, so her father then changed his mind and, instead, accepted that man to take his daughter's hand, despite the previous arrangement and his daughter's protest. In Bangladesh, it's the father's word over his daughter's wishes, and she was doomed to spend her entire life with a man she did not desire. So, in the night, after the marriage ceremony was completed, she was due to move in with the groom and his family and relocate to the other village. My grandfather's sister did not hesitate and ran off in a frenzy in the dark, never to be seen again on her wedding night. The next morning when she was found, it was deep in the forest and hanging by her neck from a branch of the old banyan tree. My aunt could not believe it. While she listened to the story, her eyes welled up with tears. When the imam visited the house one day, he clarified that what my aunt encountered was not my grandfather's sister. It was a Djinn who took the form of her and followed my aunt back home to London. For those who don't know, Jinns are demons in the Islamic world. In Islam, there is no notion of ghosts being trapped in their last moments of life. There's only the Djinn that imitate the deceased person and prey upon people. The reason why the old banyan tree was perceived as haunted by the villagers was not because of my grand aunt's tragic demise. A few other horrific events happened revolving around that tree in the past. Once a passing traveller was caught stealing jewelry from the village and was chased by the villagers into the forest. He was hacked to death with machetes. The thief's body was slumped down, resting on the trunk of the banyan tree, with his blood painting the bark red. Another story was that a witch was caught doing black magic deep in the forest, where bloody rags and torn up pages of the Quran with black writings scribbled all over were found hanging from the tree. Whoever interacted with that tree always reported to experience some sort of supernatural activity, one way or another. That day when my aunt first explained to everyone about the woman, my grandfather had a strong feeling that she was talking about his deceased sister. I didn't remember this whole ordeal when it happened at the time because I was very young, but the story was told to me by various family members when I was older. It was only recently that my aunt and I were talking at a family function, and she retold her story to me herself in the utmost detail. Her story was always the focal point whenever the subject of the paranormal arose during family conversations. A couple of people think my aunt was just suffering from mental illness during that time, although this doesn't make any sense. My aunt never knew my grandfather's sister before that revelation. My grandfather never once mentioned or showed a picture of his sister to either my aunt or her siblings while they were growing up. Neither did my grandmother. It was a painful, touchy subject, and it was never heard or mentioned. I believe my aunt, and this was very real to her, and it greatly impacted her life growing up as it permanently left a mark on her. I'm just glad that she's back to normal, and that the woman in the red sari was gone for good. I recently posted a story here which happened to my aunt, who went on a trip to Bangladesh many years back and something followed her back home. A lot of you wanted to hear more stories, so here's another story which happened to other family members in Bangladesh. This story happened to my maternal cousin and his wife back in the early 2010s. My cousin, his wife and their 2 children went on a trip to Dhaka, the capital city of Bangladesh. They spent the weekend there, touring the city, and overall just enjoyed a short respite until they had to return back to their busy lives in the village. After the weekend was up, the family bid farewell to my cousin's friend who had hosted them and set off on the road back to Sylhet, the area which my family comes from. They left in the late evening and wouldn't be back until late in the night, as the drive was about 5 hours long. That night turned out to be quite a foggy one. The only thing visible was the light from the headlights penetrating the fog. Deep in the rural country, there were no streetlights, so night was black as pitch. Also, that late in the night, there are no cars on the small country roads, and villages were separated miles apart from each other, although you may see lighted up windows of an occasional solitary house by the road. My cousin's wife and his children were all fast asleep, while he had the difficult task of having to stay awake while trying to navigate through the exacerbating fog. The car he was driving was very old, so there were no inbuilt fog lights to assist him. He crossed a familiar bridge, and he knew it wasn't too long until they were back at the village. My cousin felt like he was going to doze off at the wheel, so he decided to stop the car and pour himself a tea from a flask. His wife awoke and asked him where they were. As he was in the middle of answering, the 2 of them heard a muffled wailing in the distance. They both looked at each other, confirming if they both had heard the sound. The sound stopped, and the 2 both dismissed it, thinking it was either a howling of a fox or the call of a deer, as these were common nocturnal sounds in the country. They both resumed their conversation and started to recount their time in the city. But that was short-lived, as the wailing started again. This time it sounded a bit closer, and it soon became evident that it was indeed the wailing of a person and not the call of an animal. It sounded like a woman. My cousin's wife felt very unnerved and told him to drive, but he decided to open his window and call out to whoever was out there in the fog. She chided him, but as she was repeating herself that he should start moving the car, a white figure slowly emerged from the fog and into the headlights. It was a young woman. She was dressed in a plain white sari and had raven black locks trailing down her body. Her eyes were filled with tears as they glistened in the headlights, a few sliding down her cheeks. She motioned with her hand to my cousin and started to approach his window. They both found it very odd that the woman was wandering around in the pitch darkness with no light. Something about the way she moved also seemed a little off. My cousin's wife started to freak out and told him to floor it, but he decided to hear what the woman had to say, thinking that she was in danger, as she was clearly distressed. The woman told him that she lived nearby and that her husband kicked her out of the house and wasn't letting her back inside due to a heated argument they had had earlier. My cousin took pity on the woman and asked her where she lived. The woman replied that her house was a few yards away, through some trees on the right. My cousin thought that he couldn't just leave a young woman out in the dark night, especially as foggy as that one. He told his wife he would go up to the house and talk to the woman's husband and try to convince him to let her back inside. Despite his wife's protest, my cousin started to move the car slowly. As the car drove on for a while and turned right, there, in the headlights, was a small one-story house. Seeing that no lights were on indicated that whoever lived there was already asleep. My cousin got out of the car, walked up to the house and knocked on the door. As he continued to knock for the third time, the horn from the car blared out in the night. He looked back at the car to check up on his wife and kids, but both the darkness and the fog made it hard to see despite the car's headlights being on full beam. The door to the house opened, and a tired and confused-looking man in his 40s peered out with a lantern. He asked my cousin what he wanted and why he knocked on a stranger's door this late in the night. My cousin explained the situation and asked the man kindly to allow his wife back inside. The man nodded unenthusiastically, like he already understood the situation. He told my cousin that whoever that woman was not his wife. He explained that there was a certain woman that roamed around the area at night and sometimes stopped passing cars, telling them the same story she told my cousin. The man swore that he had no idea who the woman was and insisted that my cousin and his family recited some prayers and went on their way. The man then closed the door. My cousin was perplexed. At that same time, the car's horn started to go off again, this time continuously. My cousin walked back to the car to see his wife shaking as she was consoling their children, who were now both awake from the sound of the car horn. My cousin asked her where the woman went, but she shouted at him to get back inside the car and drive. The woman was nowhere to be seen, so he got inside and they all went on their way. When the children returned to sleep, my cousin's wife started to scold him. When he asked her what got her so rattled, she revealed to him that when he was knocking at the door of the house, she switched on his phone's torchlight to better see the woman. It was then that the woman came by her passenger window. What was eerily strange was that it looked like the woman glided towards her. My cousin's wife then said that she looked down at the woman and saw that she had no feet and was floating a good few inches off the ground. She looked in horror, and that was when she first sounded the horn. As her husband was talking to the man in the house, the woman stared blankly at her and tried to open her door, but luckily it was locked. The woman then walked away, back into the fog. My cousin tried to reassure his wife and told her that she must have been confused as the fog played tricks on her mind. But his wife opposed strongly and was adamant on what she had seen. He repeated to her what the man had said to him, and he just chalked it up to the woman just being crazy, and nothing more. My cousin's wife was seething and decided not to speak to him for the duration of the journey. When the family arrived at the village, all the nearby houses had their lights off, which meant that it was very late. They entered the house, leading their sleepy children onto their respective beds. The atmosphere was still tense between the husband and wife, so no words were shared. A while later, the two started to settle in. My cousin's wife decided to have a bath. My cousin was feeling hungry after the long journey, so he went to the kitchen to fix him and his wife a late supper. A peace offering, he thought. But as he walked past the sitting room, he saw that his wife had already laid food out on the floor for him. He got another plate for his wife and thought that he would wait for her to finish up so she could join him. He sat and waited as the mixed aroma of fresh rice, fried fish, and green chilies wafted through his nostrils. A while later, his wife entered the room. She gave him a big smile. She thanked him for making her some food, as she too was feeling hungry. My cousin was confused and affirmed to her that she prepared the meal for him before she went for a bath. She replied that she didn't. The two looked at each other in bewilderment, which then slowly turned into fear. Neither of them remembered if they saw food laid out beforehand, nor did they smell it as they entered the house. They both tried to rationalize that maybe the family prepared the meal, as they all knew that they were expected to return that very night. But that didn't make any sense, as the food was found piping hot, with steam still billowing out from the pans. Everyone in the village was fast asleep long before they had arrived back. Also, why was there a meal only fit for one person, with only one plate set up? Surely whoever cooked food would not only cook for my cousin, but for his wife and children as well. The next day, the couple asked their family in the village if anyone had prepared food for them before they had returned home. Everyone they had asked swore that they didn't. My cousin and his wife started to freak out. It was then that my cousin started to believe his wife on what she had seen. They had no explanation on who laid out that meal the previous night, and was certain that it had something to do with that strange woman. The couple went back home and recited some prayers around the house. The village elders mentioned that the woman sounded like a Ferotni. According to Bengali folklore, mainly from the Sylhet region, a Ferotni was a female entity dressed all in white, with very long hair, who roamed the countryside at night. According to whoever told the story, the Ferotni was either a witch or a Djinn who preyed upon young men who were out late. Sort of like a succubus. That related to my cousin, as that same morning he complained about having horrific nightmares all night. Some were believed to be sexual in nature. He also woke up finding deep scratches and bite marks all over his body, and overall felt very weak when he awoke. This only happened to him that one time and ceased completely, with no further encounters. My cousin was still coaxed to undertake an Islamic exorcism ritual. Surprisingly enough, he didn't react badly during the ritual or show any signs of affliction. It was believed that whatever preyed upon him left him after that very night. It is also theorized that whatever the woman was followed the family home, and due to my cousin's caring nature to help her, she prepared him that meal as a way of saying thank you. Hello watchers and listeners, thank you all so much for listening. If you have a story you'd like to share with the channel, please send it to my email. It's found in the description below. If you'd like to support the channel memberships are now available with custom badges and emojis. Only one tier at the moment, but more will be added soon, with more perks. So, feel free to check that out if that sounds interesting to you. And, as always, the biggest thank you to all of you. I truly appreciate all of your support throughout the years. And remember,
Papa loves you.